So here we'll be responding with Turf. I do like this person's content, big admirer of their work over the years. I would recommend this essay. I thought it was excellent. I liked the presentation, the editing style, and so on and so forth, but I do think he misunderstood key parts of the Jedi lore. So first we're going to look at his conception of the prequels, which I think is wrong, and then turn to the sequels proper, and The Last Jedi in particular, which I mostly do agree with, but I think some places it's much weaker than I think he thinks it is. Let's begin with his praise for what Rian Johnson did.
By his emotions and being prone to make mistakes. Essentially, he was everything the Jedi of old weren't, but that was exactly what the galaxy needed. Palpatine had taken advantage of the way the Jedi Order functioned. They were perfect. They didn't second guess themselves because they knew they were the good guys. They looked down on emotions and impulses, but this made them blind to the growing darkness within Anakin and Palpatine's master plan. And in the end, it was relatively easy for Palpatine to manipulate the whole Jedi Order, but he couldn't do the same with Luke, because Luke had flaws. He wasn't perfect, and in the end, that was his greatest strength. That was at least how I interpreted Luke's character in the original trilogy, and so I really like the idea of us delving further into Luke's flaws, giving—
Well, I'm very confused in terms of his idea that the Jedi in the prequels were perfect or even unemotional. I just don't think that's what happened. Clearly, Mace Windu has feelings of jealousy towards Anakin. There's feelings of frustration by Obi-Wan towards Anakin. So the Jedi are very emotional. They're not robots. I think the question here is Lucas is looking at the deeper philosophy of restraining your emotions, but doing so in reasonable but also unreasonable ways, and essentially Sidious took advantage of that.
Anakin, if one is to understand the great mystery, one must study all its aspects, not just the dogmatic, narrow view of the Jedi. If you wish to become a complete and wise leader, you must embrace a larger view of the Force.
So I think he's got a bizarre interpretation of the prequels, which I just don't see. I can understand how he got there, but I don't think that's what Lucas was up to with prequels. I don't myself think that The Last Jedi hangs or falls, frankly, on Luke Skywalker. For me, The Last Jedi is, as a whole, a very strong film. You can definitely take issue with particular plot points or even particular themes that don't seem to resonate with you. For me, though, it does structurally stand up, but that's the way I'm looking at it. Now we're turning to the sequels, and I think the controversy over Rey and what Ryan decided to do with her, quote, parentage. And again, I mostly am here in agreement with what Turf is up to, but I'm going to go in a different direction. But I do agree the ending of The Last Jedi was very powerful and also spoke to me as well.
the galaxy, and for someone to show her the way. But she's alone. Only she can give her life meaning. But it's not just good for her character, it's also good for Star Wars in general, because it demystified the Force. For a long time, the franchise had focused on the Skywalker family and how powerful they are. But Rey, being a literal no one, gave back this idea that the Force can appear in anyone. It was awesome that a random girl could be just as strong in the Force as the prodigy of the most powerful bloodline in the galaxy. That stuff speaks to me. I saw myself in Star Wars again. Even if you're just a nobody, you can still do great things. I wanted to be a Jedi when I was a kid, and this movie made me feel like a kid again, and I like that. This theme also tied in perfectly with the ending shot of the kid looking up at the stars, because that little kid was me. The person—
Well, again, I'm a little puzzled by his interpretation of the Jedi mythology. It was always democratic. Again, canonically, Obi-Wan tells us that this is some kind of mystical energy that is pervasive through the universe. And although I do like the prequels, I don't like what Lucas did with the midichlorians, which I think created a lot of questions and complications, which the sequel trilogy probably wisely just took off the agenda. It's there in the background, right? The midichlorians aren't gone, but it's just something they're not going to treat in detail. The way I always conceived it is that they're just going to be random Force users that the midichlorians, for whatever reason, will be put into the body of certain people much more than others. So I don't see how Rey having certain kind of parents really affects that one way or the other. I don't see a direct connection, and I do like what he is basically saying, that you're now able to see the Force in a much more liberating fashion. I do agree there. However, I don't know if I need to see myself in particular with the kid at the end. I'm glad he got that feeling. I was more honestly exhilarated at the way the narrative just structurally came together, that all these threads and pieces, which people thought were random or stupid and silly, do actually unify at the end. Again, you can still quibble with certain parts, the way that the jokes weigh down certain aspects, the tone is not always consistent, so on and so forth. But on the whole, I think this is a very strong film. But that's the way I look at it. It's a very strong story and narrative. But whether I see myself as a Jedi or Sith, I've kind of moved beyond that. I'm getting a little older. I still feel a lot of enthusiasm when I hear the music with the Phantom Menace and seeing the Darth Maul fight. But more and more, I just do see Star Wars as an interesting set of ideas, stories, and myths. I don't need to see myself as a Jedi or Sith or want to become one, but that's me. So I'm glad he did find a very personal connection to The Last Jedi. But for me, it's really it's the structure of the film as a story that I find very attractive, above and beyond what you can get into with the characters and what's going on with their particular conflicts. So again, a very strong essay, but I do respectfully disagree with some of his interpretations. But I do agree on the whole that The Last Jedi has been underrated and misunderstood. So I do recommend the essay. I think Turf does excellent work. I'd recommend seeking out his work, but I do think at certain points you'd want to correct some misconceptions he gives about how the Jedi function and how the prequels worked and the way they're tied to the sequel trilogy.